So if we have a look at season 3 of Dana White's Contender Series, which we've said it's murky waters to say the least. This is a tough one because the question of success can be measured in so many different ways. And a guy who's already been a part of the UFC and then found a ton of success since he was with the UFC in his very short tenure.
The PFL.
Brendan Loughnane. I mean, the guy put on a great performance in the Contender Series this year. Didn't get signed. Everybody was upset about it. Now he gets a shot in the PFL. He has a chance to win $1 million. It's a good story. I thought he'd end up with Bellator simply because they've been putting on a big European push. But were you surprised signing with PFL?
I kind of was, because I was in the same boat as you. I really thought that he'd be perfect for Bellator, because Bellator is always kind of like, they're looking for anyone the UFC kind of gives up on, just so they can say we're the one who has them. It's kind of, I don't know, it's almost kind of what they become now. They were sort of the Legends League there for a little while. Now they're in the ex-UFC star league. And not to say he was going to go on to be a big star or anything, but he's definitely a recognizable person. And a lot of that does have to do, and I know Dana White probably didn't want this to happen, but a lot of his popularity has come from the big controversy of him not getting signed.
Yeah. For sure. And I think he's going to be one of those guys who's primed for success wherever he goes. I mean, he's been a consummate professional. He's also been a professional fighter for a really long time as well. And a well-known guy. And listen, he finally got a shot to go back into the UFC. It backfired on them, I believe. And listen, truth be told, they don't make a lot of mistakes. But I think this was one that, yeah, they might regret. Dana will say they don't, but they might.
This will be like the Ryan Bader thing.
If we continue on through this, I mean, let's go with a couple of shout-outs. So, from this past week, Herbert Burns gets a contract.
Yeah,
this is a guy at featherweight that can kind of, listen, he's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. He can get it done in all sorts of different ways. He can certainly get the submission as well. And you've got his brother Gilbert fighting this weekend. So, Herbert signed to the UFC. You've got a tale of two brothers. A great story. One other guy that it was announced this past week has a fight coming up is Teddy Ash. And we told you about him a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was Trademark MMA's question to us. Who are some of these Canadians that we should be paying attention to? And of course, we're going to be doing a big play on UFC Vancouver. I know there's a lot of shows that you might be able to find us on for that. But as far as the Contender Series is concerned, Teddy Ash has a fight coming up. He's been with Unified MMA out of Alberta for a long time, fighting there. Obviously, his good friend Tanner Boser was supposed to fight here recently on the Edmonton card, his hometown. Of course, Lemos decided couldn't pass the old test. But looking forward to Teddy Ash coming up later on this year. And I'm going to rattle off a couple of names of 3 guys that have really high potential. I know if you're a big Dana White Contender Series fan, if you're a big Midwestern MMA fan, you're going to recognize these names. And Brendan Aalon, perfect last name, Miles Johns, and Hunter Azure. And the last fighter there, and listen, Miles Johns is probably the most UFC ready.
Oh, with it.
Brendan Aalon, I think he's going to find success, and I think he'll do well. We've seen some of the fights that he's had in the past against UFC competition. Hunter Azure is a guy that has a win streak that dates back as far as time can go. No, realistically, let's look at him on Tapology, Matt. Just bring him up really quick. Because if you look at him as a pro, I mean, he just started as a pro in 2017.
So many amateur fights.
You go to his, a ton of amateur fights, but back to 2014 was the last time that he lost a fight. Huge win streak, plenty of finishes as well. Last 2 are decisions, but it's that top fight that makes sense to me, and that's why I really wanted to talk about him here, because, listen, we're talking about Canadian MMA. If you're new to the program, we're from Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. But
beautiful city.
Hunter Azure is going to be taking on Brad Katona, and this was a fight that a lot of people are excited for. UFC Vancouver, because for some reason Brad Katona has been one of the better performing SBG fighters in the last calendar year.
Didn't do well in his last one though.
No, but he's one of the more
but active, I mean, still
active.
Gunnar lost his last one. Connor lost his last one. It's not.
No, well, either way, but Hunter Azure's, it's a tough test in your first fight in UFC. You got Katona, who won one of the more recent seasons of The Ultimate Fighter. So that rounds it out, but it's tough to tell so far through season 3.
Exactly.
You have to more or less agree, and I'll bring it back up once more, but you have to more or less agree with Luke Thomas here. And listen, when can you not agree with Luke Thomas? The guy knows what he's talking about. But yeah, it just feels like season 3 is a little bit more watered down. Some of these fighters that we mentioned are, maybe a little bit more UFC ready, but from season 1 and 2, I think those fighters will have obviously quicker success in UFC, but I feel like their highs are going to be higher than season 3.
I agree. Like some of the names we pulled out from the earlier seasons, you have guys like Ian Heinisch and Jeff Neal, who realistically you could see them in the top 15. I guess with Heinisch he is already, but you can see these guys in the top 15, in the top 10. Possibly even main eventing like a fight night down the road somewhere. And you can't really say that for any of the people in season 3 just yet. Like give it a year, give it 2 years, just to let their careers sort of breathe a little bit, so we kind of have a better idea.
All right, Matt. So season 3 of Dana White's Contender Series. Again, we've seen some of these fighters making an impact in the UFC, and I think with the first week too, the 2 people that were signed, they've had quite an immediate impact in the UFC. And I'm talking about Punahele or Soriano, as well as Yorgan Castro. And we also saw Hannah Goldie get a chance in the UFC. She didn't get a contract on that episode. And Brennan Loughnane was kind of the talk of the town. He gets a win over Bill Algeo, where he absolutely dominated. And
fight of the night, but he took him down with 10 seconds left.
And he didn't get signed because, again, he took him down and somehow he's a boring fighter, which we've talked about. It's that entertainment value with the UFC that typically propels you even more forward.
And this is the thing. Like, when I first started becoming a hardcore, if you will, it used to really tick me off that the rankings were busted the way they are. But once you kind of indoctrinate yourself enough into the sport, you just realize this is how things work. So, like, you want to kind of help people figure it out, too. I don't think fighters realize right now how important it is to just be on Twitter. Every main event's canceled. All you have to do is make people talk about you, and you're all of a sudden a main event or a co-main event of a show.
Sean O'Malley has a good performance in his last time out, and then he goes and does the whole, hitting the mitts and running with his shirt, and people gravitate towards it. Same as Chase Hooper. So yeah, make yourself available on social media. Yorgan Castro is an example of that. I see him on Instagram and Twitter all the time posting stuff, and he has a big fight booked already with Greg Hardy after getting a huge win over Justin Taffa in Australia. I mean, that was a great win for him. So Punahele Soriano, in the division he's in, I don't know how big of an impact he's going to be able to make, but if he can keep knocking people out...
The Oscar Peota fight was nice.
Yeah, if he can keep knocking people out, I mean, all of a sudden, that entertainment value, boom, you're on the scene.
And Hawaiians, they love Hawaiians in the UFC. Like, the fact that there hasn't been a card in Hawaii yet is absurd. So hopefully if they ever do that, and someday soon, then he could be on the main card.
Week number 2, you're talking about Miles Johns and Miguel Baeza getting contracts. I know Miguel Baeza was booked into a fight here somewhat recently. The name evades me who was supposed to fight. But Miles Johns at 135 has looked quite good. And I know in this fight against Richie Santiago, a good job for him there as well. But in terms of name value on that card, not as much in week 2. And this is where we're going to start to see it's kind of settling because you've drawn and zapped so much out of local talent, not just in the States, but in North America, in Europe as well. Even moving into week number 3, I mean, we're talking about a lot of contracts handed out. Holy crow. You got Jonathan Pearce.
Everyone who won got one.
Jonathan Pearce, Maki Pitolo, Hunter Azure, Antonio Trocoli, and Joseph Solecki. And listen, I mean, out of these guys, I mean, Maki Pitolo's been so-so. Hunter Azure looked great in Vancouver. He took on Brad Katona, got a win there. So for anybody out of this episode, it's kind of weird that so many people got contracts, but Hunter Azure's probably that guy just out of that episode that has the high ceiling, especially at 135 pounds. Then you move on to week number 4. You had Antonio Arroyo, Ode Osbourne, Dontel Mays again. Like, they just kept giving him shots and finally got a contract. Brennan Aalon and Kevin Seiler.
Brennan Allen's been pretty good.
I would say that out of anybody there, yeah. Antonio Arroyo had that weird fight where it was Brazil against Brazil of Contender Series guys.
First off, he looks like a heavyweight, so how he makes 185, I'll never know. But he was kind of marketed as the new Thiago Santos, and we just never got it. So.
Yeah, it just hasn't happened. Ode Osbourne at 135. I mean, making moves and starting grooves. You never know what's going to happen for him. And Dontel Mays, again, at heavyweight, they kept bringing him in, and he kept getting wins on Contender Series. And then in the UFC, I just don't know if it's going to be an impact. But Brendan Allen at 185, he's been susceptible to getting hit.
He doesn't care, though.
Holy smokes, has he looked pretty good.
If you want a fun fight, watch Brendan Allen fight. We're not just saying this because he shares the last name with us. Brendan Allen, kind of marketed as sort of a grappler, but really good striking, really good wrestling, too. Just sort of a well-rounded athlete. Reminds me a lot of Ian Heinisch, to be completely honest, so I'd like to see those guys fight in the future, but definitely the best guy from that episode, if not this whole season, because season 3, just for the record, it's the worst of the seasons.
Well, you had season 1 down there, but now it sounds like you're flip-flopping. But in 2-3-1. Again, in the 5th week, so we have Jordan Williams coming back on, doesn't get a win. Sean Woodson gets a win, gets signed. You have Jamahal Hill and Billy Quarantillo getting contracts. those are the two guys that I want to focus on. Not that Sean Woodson doesn't have a promising career in the UFC, but Jamahal Hill fighting Darko Stozic on the opener of that North Carolina card from Raleigh. Holy smokes, Jamahal Hill looked great. And yeah, his hands weren't overly high. He kept them kind of low, but his kicks and his range are great. And I think at 205, a guy like Jamahal Hill, a guy like Ryan Spann, we've seen it with Rakic, long rangy guys that are able to move up the ranks. If Jamahal Hill can string together some wins in 2020, if 2020 happens, then, he could have a decent ceiling.
I want to see him fight. You're not going to lie. I want to see him fight Ed Herman. Because Ed Herman at 205 right now, he's just a really good guy to throw at prospects because he doesn't get tired, he's hard to knock out.
And he's volume heavy.
Exactly. Just real gritty. So if you're going to beat him, it's not going to be an easy fight no matter what. You could be, like John Jones probably wouldn't have an easy fight against Ed Herman. Ed Herman's, he's coming to play. So that's a fight that I would like to see in the future.
And Billy Quarantillo as well. This is a guy, and we've talked about him a little bit recently. A King of the Cage guy gets the win here, and he's going to be facing Gavin Tucker. So hopefully that fight happens. But Billy Quarantillo, a guy to watch out for.
Dana White, everything's back to business as usual, April 14th.
Week 6, we have quite a few people getting contracts. Again, we have Aleksa Camur, Aalon Cruz, Tracy Cortez, and Rodrigo Nascimento, who I don't think we've seen in the UFC yet. I know we haven't. We've seen Tracy Cortez, and I think especially whether it's women's flyweight, wherever, I think she has a marketability, and she's marketed herself quite well as her fighting skills. So I think she could have a good future in the UFC. She's somebody to watch out for, somebody from Phoenix, Arizona. Aalon Cruz beat Steven Wynn to get a chance, and man, what a fight that was on Contender Series. One of the best fights on Contender Series. Great finish. Had a tough time out against Spike Carlisle, and maybe we'll bring up Spike Carlisle a little bit later. But Aleksa Camur getting the win over Fabio Chernot, people will recognize that name. But Aleksa Camur in his UFC debut, holy smokes, wow, a ton of power from this guy.
There's power. There's no cardio or speed to go along with it, unfortunately. So he lost. Why are we that excited about his UFC debut?
Still, one loss.
Camur looks intimidating, and then the fight starts, and you figure out he's not that intimidating.
So we'll see what happens there. But week number 5, a few more names to add to it. And then week number 7, so we talked about it, Antonio Arroyo, Andre Muniz, who they were matched up together. He gets a contract out of this episode. You also have Omar Morales, but the point here in this episode was the fact that Herbert burns. So he gets a win over Derek Minner, which isn't easy. I mean, we saw Derek Minner come in and he fights against Grant Dawson, and it doesn't go his way, but it was on days' notice. And Derek Minner has a ton of experience on the regional scene. For Herbert Burns to get a win like he did on that episode, and then to come into the UFC and take on Nate Landwehr, who former M1 global champion, another gritty vet. Herbert Burns, I don't know if,
he's not Gilbert. Let's calm down. But
I don't know if a number next to his name. I don't know if he's a contender. We need to see more of him against top competition.
I like what I've seen so far, though.
But yeah, he's not facing guys that are 6-1 or 6-2. He's facing guys with actual records. A really good point. And to see him overcome those guys in impressive fashion, to me it signals that yes, he definitely has a clear path up. Maybe a 15-20 guy next. Maybe somebody like that.
100%. I'd much rather my prospects, when I'm looking through their record, to have a record of 11-4, but actually have fought really good fighters, as opposed to having a guy who's 16-0. But when you actually look at the record, they've only been fighting people who have -500 records. So it's not always a sign that, the record's not great. They're not great, and Burns is amazing. But it really matters just the level of competition they fought on their way up to the UFC. That's all.
So for week number 8, this is where there were a lot of really good matchups, and you'll recognize a lot of names. I know William Knight, he was in the main event at light heavyweight. They signed him to a developmental deal, and then he lost a fight, if not 2. But he's a guy to still keep tabs on. But you also had Brock Weaver, Sarah Alpar, Shanny Young, who got a chance on short notice in the UFC. Tony Gravely, Ray Rodriguez was a battle of, regional promotional champions. And Tony Gravely ends up getting the win, ends up in the UFC, and put on a decent performance in his debut. And then you had Julius Anglikas as well. So some recognizable names again. Week number 9, you go through it. Only Philip Rowe gets a chance. Steve Garcia also on this episode, who ends up in the UFC and fights Luis Pena. I'm sure he's going to get more of a chance.
100%.
And you don't know, is it at 35? Is it at 45? Who knows?
Hopefully 45.
Steve Garcia ends up in the UFC. And again, this is where we just keep going through. And week number 10, you had Dusko Todorovic. He gets a contract with a win over Teddy Ash, the Canadian. We were pumping the tires of this fight. And Todorovic, he was supposed to be on the London card, but that fight got scrapped. They were hoping to have it on the Cage Warriors card. It didn't happen. You also had Peter Barrett and TJ Brown getting contracts, and Ben Sassoli was on that episode, didn't get a contract, but ends up in the UFC. TJ Brown as well. So he gets the win over Dylan Lockhart. He finishes him. I saw Dylan Lockhart fight before this fight. It was like his entrance into Contender Series. He fought Jesse Erickson, who just got a win over Josh Harvey, which is a really big win. And he was on Man vs. Bear on Discovery Channel. But Dylan Lockhart, to lose to TJ Brown, to me signaled, hey, TJ Brown, if he can beat a good grappler in Dylan Lockhart, then there's a good chance he's going to go far in the UFC. He did lose his debut, so I don't know where that leaves him. He's a main training partner and good buddy of Bryce Mitchell, who believes that the coronavirus was created by the government against the people. But the point is, that's season 3 of Contender Series. Not as many recognizable names.
None.
Pretty vague about what we're going to see for contenders. So season 1, you have your blue chip prospects. Season 2, a lot of good name value, and maybe we see some people as contenders. Season 3, pretty much up in the air. And then you have the Brazilian season, which, again, a lot of names that ended up in the UFC. I mean, you have week 1.
Bontarin's good.
Rogerio Bontarin, Mayer Buena Silva, Antonio Arroyo, Sarah Frota, and Augusto Sakai all end up in the UFC. Sarah Frota out. Antonio Arroyo, who ended up back on Contender Series and losing. Mayer Buena Silva, who just fought. Rogerio Bontarin, that's actually looked really good. And Augusto Sakai,
actually good.
A guy that's been in Bellator before and has fought some top talent. And in the UFC, he only has 1 loss on his record. He's one of those guys that with a few wins, and I know on the hardcore rankings, I have him ranked. I think Augusto Sakai has a pretty good shot at heavyweight to continue to move up the ranks.
I think he deserves to be ranked just off the Fabrice Verdun fought him. The Russian guy in the main event. He knocked him out in like 30 seconds, not in the main event. Oh, you're killing me, Craig.
This is tough.
Who did it go so? Marcin Debora, thank you.
He's not Russian. He's Polish.
Polish. That Marcin Debora fight really showed me, though. Like, Debora, you can say what you want about him. He's kind of slow. He's not the most athletic guy ever, but he's been in the top 15 for Lord knows how long. So just beating a guy that early in your career, guy who has that much more experience than you, it really shows a lot. So that win alone should have him in the top 15. But I do agree. Augusto Sakai is a guy who he might not be in the top 5. I don't think he'll ever fight for a title, but he's gonna be a fun heavyweight for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his record. He has a draw against Dan Charles in Bellator. Then he lost a split decision to Czech Congo. We've seen he had success in the UFC, and right now in Bellator, holy smokes, Czech Congo. And then if you look at his UFC run, Chase Sherman, and then Andrei Arlovsky, who's that litmus test, and then the win over Marcin Tybura. So Augusto Sakai, a guy to watch. In week 2, you had Andre Muniz, Talia Santos, Johnny Walker, Marina Rodriguez, Marcio Alessandri Jr. You also had Enrique de Silva taking on Johnny Walker in that fight that already had a shot in the UFC. This was his second chance. Johnny Walker, I know last summer everybody was super high on him, loses a few. Like what needs to happen for a guy like that to gain the grace that he had before?
So fired up. Yeah, so right after he lost to Corey Anderson, he shouldn't have blamed everyone else for his loss and not himself. I think that's the worst thing a fighter can do. Dominic Cruz is one of my all-time favorite UFC moments when he lost to Cody Garbrandt and he stood up and he answered every single question anyone had to ask him. And people were asking like really, heavy, hard-hitting questions that a lot of other fighters would just got up and left. But Dominic Cruz just stood there and he was like, yeah, this sucks, but like, my job's pretty good. My life's pretty good. So if this is the worst thing I have to go through, then I'm doing pretty well all in all. Johnny Walker did the 100% opposite. He blamed his girlfriend. He blamed his coaches. He blamed everybody. And I feel like that just ruins your career the second you do that. And his last performance, I know he looked okay on the feet and a few moments against Krylov, but he just didn't seem to have that explosiveness that he did. It's not that he wasn't even going for them, because he was throwing a flying knee here and there. He just didn't really seem to have the same pop behind everything, and he seemed unsure of every strike. Like, oh, if I throw this flying knee, if I don't hit it, then I'm probably getting taken down.
That's the thing. Like, it's tough to have a good fight against a guy like Nikita Krylov, because on the feet he's adept, but on the ground he's quite good.
He's good when he's on top. So you would think though, if you're Johnny Walker and you're much bigger than him, like it did look like 2 different weight classes were fighting at that point. Johnny Walker, you're a tall, rangy striker. He shouldn't even be able to take you down. You're so far away from him in the first place. So there was just a lot of fight IQ problems in that fight, I think, and that's what I'm going to chalk it up to. So if he can get with a camp, quit traveling all over the world, training with different people. I know he had a few coaches who went with him kind of everywhere, but he was big with cross-training, going to different gyms and whatnot. Like, stop doing that.
You see people have success with that, and the 2 people that I'll throw out, we've already talked about them.
Douglas Lima and...
Douglas and Diego, and it's weird because these are going to be 2 sibling pairs. Douglas and Diego, and Antonina and Valentina Shevchenko, because they'll train. They
really?
train.
Two of the best fighters in the world.
Yeah,
and their
it's
brothers.
Valentina Shevchenko trained in the middle of nowhere in Maine for her fight in Toronto. Like at just a hole in the wall gym with just, average people, and she's one of the best fighters in the world. But in terms of Contender Series and Johnny Walker, I don't know. Like, you'd have to find some consistency, I would think. And again, getting with some wrestlers, getting your confidence back. There's a whole slew of gyms in the States that I think would help out there.
You're not going to like this idea. I'd completely turn the other way into it. I'd go to Thailand, do nothing but train striking.
Which he's done. He's gone there before.
And it's weird because it's almost like when he was doing that, he was knocking people out. And now that he's gone to Russia and TriStar, he's fighting a little bit differently. And here's the problem too. Every gym, and gyms and coaches don't say this, but it's kind of true. Every gym has sort of their own style. I know ATT fighters just because who fights there. Robbie Lawler, Jorge Masvidal, and Dustin Poirier come from ATT, so it kind of tells you the type of fighters that they're going to have. And yes, they have good wrestlers and whatnot. It's a big roster, but every fight or every gym story kind of has their own style. So if you're expecting to only do one camp there and then implement sort of their style, if you will, into your fight, it's not that fast. You can't do it overnight. Go to a gym, stay there for multiple training camps, and actually let that gym kind of mold you to what they want to see you. Because Johnny Walker has all the talent in the world. He's fast. He hits hard. Those are really all you need. You just need cardio and skills to back it up. So
takedown defense.
Exactly. So if he did stay with TriStar and actually stay there for not just 1 year, not just 2, 3, 4 years, let For Us a Hobby really try to train you, really teach you a lot that he knows, and then we might see better performances in the future. But what he's doing right now just isn't working.
So that was the second week. Then there was a third week. You had Raulian Paiva, who we've seen have success at flyweight. He lost his first 2. He's ranked. It was weird. And then he comes out. And that's not to say that out of those 2 fights, they were bad. They weren't terrible. One of them, his eyebrow popped, and there's not much you can do. But he looked good in his last fight, gets a win there. He got
knocked out in his last fight against the guy who fought Figueiredo. Almost certain.
He won his last fight over Mark De La Rosa,
and
he knocked him out. Oh,
I'm
boy.
so wrong.
Yeah, man.
That's my bad.
Doesn't know the lowest of the flyweight division, but still. Vinicius Morea, it didn't go all that well. John Allen, who he fought, was supposed to be picked up, and then we haven't really seen him. You also had Thiago Moises, and you had Luana Carolina Souza getting contracts. Now, the one thing I want to say, again, Raulian Paiva getting ranked, it's not that it's super easy, but it's going to be easier at flyweight because you don't have a lot of people. But if I could rank all these seasons of Contender Series, for me, I would go Season 1 is my number 1, Season 2 is my number 2, Brazil is my number 3, and Season 3 is my number 4. Because out of Brazil, we've had a lot of fighters signed. And I know it was only 3 weeks with some of the best talent in Brazil or out of Brazil. But we've had a lot of people making an impact out of that season versus Season 3 where, again, the Brazilian season happened in 2018, so it's been a slow burn. Whereas we just had Season 3 of just your average Contender Series, and we haven't been able to see a lot of that competition, but it's just name value off of Brazil Season 2 and Season 1 that have done it for me. Would you agree with that ranking?
The only difference I would do is I'd have number 2, so I'd go 2, 1 Brazil, and then 3 is my ranking. I do agree with you. I think 1 and 2 are the 2 best. I just have them ranked a little bit differently. I just feel like the volume of Season 2 is a little bit better than the talent of Season 1, but Season 1, just with Jeff Neal and Sean O'Malley, those are the 2 guys who I really do believe, regardless of everyone else, and Sadiq Yusuf's kind of in that category, but he's not really there just yet. Those are the 2 that I can honestly see maybe one day fighting for the title. And that's about it. And again, that's my problem with Tuesday Night Contender Series as a total. But Season 3, there's a big reason why we don't have enough to go off of. None of these guys have really fought that many times since their season, so the crews really haven't been able to grow that much since their debut, if you will. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of fighters in there who are going to go on to have really great careers. Just kind of too early to tell right now. But right now, Season 1 or Season 2, the best. 3, the worst. And Brazil, there is some quality fights.
Yeah, okay, so that's going to be a lot to digest for you. We went through off of our previews from last summer, offering a bit of an update from our perspective now, and going through week by week and looking at everybody that was signed, all the contenders there. So there's a lot to digest. Maybe you want to watch this in a couple of different parts. And I'm telling you this,
The Irishman.
I'm telling you this at the end. Yeah, maybe you need a little bit of a break, and then you get back to the last half hour. But in terms of this, yeah, there's all sorts of contenders. A great question asked by Lee Morey. I know we took it in a little bit of a different direction. It's one of those things that we've answered a couple of different times in a couple of different ways. So we wanted to kind of go this route today. And I know for a fact it was one of the things that I talked about with John Franklin over on Early Stoppage, which I say over on Early Stoppage.
It's going to be a Fight Night Pick show, and it's going to be coming out later on this week. We're going to be taping it tonight. We've got a special episode coming out, and it's going to be early stoppage throwback edition, the first 20. So we're going to be talking about the first 20 years of the UFC from 93 to 2013, and then we're going to get into the rest of it in a second episode. But we've got a lot planned for Fight Night Picks. Really appreciate all the questions for Parry and Counter. And Matt, we've got a lot of stuff coming up.
A lot going on.
Even if there's no fights and we're Fight Night Picks, we don't have to just pick fights.
Sean Jones still going to get in trouble.
We are picking your questions. So we really appreciate everybody tuning in. If you want to throw us questions, make sure you go down in the comments below, or you find us on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP, at Matt Allen FNP, or at Fight Night Picks. I know a lot of people have asked, where can we find you? Where can we submit questions? You can find us there as well as in the comment section. So really appreciate everybody tuning in today. And as we always like to say, Matt, with Fight Night Picks, after a really long episode, let's get into it.